Welcome to the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast powered by Hiscox. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. Throughout my career, I've had side hustles, some of which have turned into real businesses. But first and foremost, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. In the creator space, we hear plenty of advice on how to hustle harder and why you can sleep when you're dead. On this show, we ask new questions in hopes of getting new answers. Questions like, how can small businesses work smarter? How do you achieve balance between work and family? How can we redefine success in our businesses so that we don't burn out after year 3? Every week, I sit down with business founders at various stages of their side hustle to small business journey. These entrepreneurs are pushing the envelope while keeping their values. Keep listening for conversation, context, and camaraderie. Today's guest is Dominique Elkind, a user-centric designer based out of Seattle. However, today, we're not going to be talking about user-centric design. Well, we might a little bit, but we're going to be discussing Dominique's recent entrepreneurial journey with the founding of Nixi City, a children's play space that supports critical thinking, independence, and confidence. Dominique, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you on because, honestly, all of us were kids at one point, but some of us have kids now too. So it's really kind of interesting what you're doing. But before we get into all of that about Nixi City, give us a little bit about your background and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I live in Seattle, Washington. I've lived here for about 15 years. I moved here from Kansas City, Missouri. I moved here as a designer at a tech startup that was eventually went public and then was eventually also acquired. It was a company bought by Salesforce. And then I worked as a designer at a number of other startups here in the Seattle area, as well as some larger companies. And the last place that I was at before I started my company was Google. So
last place you were, so that means no full-time job. Now you're kind of all in on the new thing?
So I do still have my full-time job.
Okay. So you do have your full-time job. Okay.
You
made it sound like you didn't. So this is a side hustle for you then.
It is. So I'm actually a big proponent of like the business school adage of like, keep your side hustle as long as possible. As long as I know a lot of like my friends who are founders, really believe, and I think this is true for some companies where you really have to go all in and you really can't divert your attention. But I think for this type of business and for what I'm doing, and also the fact that I'm on maternity leave makes it really easy to to like really have a side hustle like this and use the time off in these maternity leave breaks and like leverage that to start a business like this.
Yeah, that's a great life hack there that I don't think we've heard on this podcast before. Use your maternity leave as a way to start a new business, a new side hustle. That's definitely a new one. So is this your first time then doing something entrepreneurial like this? It sounds like you've been at entrepreneurial things, but is this your first time doing it yourself?
Yes and no. So when I was at Google, we had an internal startup incubator. And so I co-founded a team inside of Google. And we eventually got acquired by a larger team. And so technically not a startup, but also sort of a startup.
Right.
But this is really, the first time that I'm doing it kind of, on my own funding.
Yeah. Yeah. So that team, it was acquired by another team inside of the same company. Is that the way that it worked?
Yeah, it was really a cool program. So
okay.
it was called Area 120. And so it was meant for, people who worked at the company who were entrepreneurial. And you could pitch ideas. You could work with executives and leaders to figure out what they wanted to basically see or invest in. So it worked like you had this internal kind of venture capital firm inside the company. And so if you got funding, you essentially got like 6 months of runway at a time to basically like launch your startup. And so if you failed, the stakes were medium-ish, I would say, because you like if your startup failed, you essentially had to find another job.
Okay.
Or team inside of Google.
Okay.
But while you were inside the incubator, and it's been through various permutations, but you essentially got, your salary. So it was a little bit of it was a nice way to kind of like dip your toe into an entrepreneurial venture.
Yeah. As you well know, with the new side hustle, yeah, there's nobody that pays your salary when you're starting up your own thing. Did you have any entrepreneurs in the family that you've seen over time? Is there an entrepreneurial streak that you're kind of running this on, or are you the first one to venture out in the family to be an entrepreneur?
So my family is pretty creative. So in my background, I started off my career as an artist. I went to school for painting. I got my degree as an artist and then became a UX designer, digital designer, brand designer. And my dad was an artist and a writer and a musician. Um, so not technically an entrepreneur, but sort of.
Right. Yeah.
And my mom was a hairdresser and a makeup artist, so she kind of did her own thing.
Okay.
A lot of creative people in my family. My great grandma was a seamstress, dressmaker. So a lot of like small business entrepreneurial people.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so tell us about the new thing and what exactly it is.
Yeah, so it is a kids play space with a cafe slash bar for parents to hang out at. And it's really meant to be this fun third place away from your home or your work where you can go hang out, let your kids kind of run wild and and not really worry about, having them run loose. When I was on maternity leave for the first time a couple of years ago, I realized how hard it was to find spaces just anywhere where I could go and, have a drink or hang out or just meet someone. Um, and I talked to a lot of other parents who were kind of experiencing very similar things where it's like it was really difficult to find somewhere to go that was just not just a place where, oh, you could bring your kids, but it's going to be really difficult and they're going to mess everything up and they're not really welcome. And also a place where it was rooted in like, so the design of the space and the play area is really rooted in this Montessori approach. So things are, hand built mostly out of wood and like soft fabric materials. All of the like toys and games, it's really meant to be a detachment away from screen time. So you can have that place for your kid to run and get some movement and playtime that's not rooted in screens.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say all this because you're in Seattle, the mecca of coffee shops, right? Because Starbucks, that was the headquarters, the start of it, and the fact that you felt this, maybe it's not unwelcomeness, but not appropriateness of those places is interesting. So you're going through this process. Was this something that people told you they needed, or did they just express that there wasn't a place and they didn't know what to do? Like, how did you figure out that this was a problem?
Yeah. So I did a number of kind of rounds of research to kind of figure out like what I wanted to do with the business and how I wanted to start it. Initially, so I did a number of like surveys. I talked to potential customers, friends, like other parents that I knew. Um, and I found a number of kind of like problem spaces. One was just like lack of childcare in general or like backup care. And so one of the initial ideas was like this place where you could have backup care. But then another problem that I saw was just a lack of, like, even more simply than that, as I was kind of diving into like what I could potentially do and what I had the skill set to really do. Because one thing I was kind of concerned about was like, I'm not really skilled at like providing childcare, nor do I think I really want to do that. But maybe eventually the space could do that. But one of the things I also heard was there's also this lack of place to have like a kids party or just go and, you know, just go and play or have a play date. There's a couple of different places. And then the more I kind of looked into it, there's a bunch of these kind of concept play cafes in Europe and South Korea. Um, and not a ton here in Seattle at all. And there's a few popping up in the United States, but they're all kind of like these mom and pop shops. So it just struck me as an interesting kind of concept of like there there are like people doing this, and it's seeing a lot of success because we all have like those of us who have kids and are looking for places to go, just don't have a ton of options. And then particularly here in Seattle, it rains a lot, obviously. And if it's
I've
not
never heard
raining,
that before about Seattle. That's new information.
yeah, and if it's not raining, it's freezing. So, I think there are a lot of places in the United States where, you might have a really nice outdoor park. And we have some of those too, but I mean, I don't use them all too often because it's
Right.
raining or it's miserable outside. And I don't want
Yeah.
to stand outside and get wet. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, that was kind of the impetus for
Yeah.
starting something like this.
So is based on the way you're talking, is the idea that this is not going to be a mom and pop thing? It's going to be something that you franchise out or build out kind of a network. Well, what are you thinking about the future for yourself?
Yeah, I'm trying not to get like too far ahead with the vision, but my initial kind of like vision for the business was definitely we'll scale it out. Like things start to get a lot more cost effective if we have multiple locations. So the goal is to have my husband and I were thinking like 3 locations minimally.
Yeah.
And we really like bake out the concept and the procedures and figure out what works in terms of like the space, in terms of the offerings, memberships, as well as like party packages and like the place, like the drop in play rates, as well as like the menu. And then we potentially franchise it or expand it out. That would be the
Right.
ultimate goal.
Right. Okay. So you're running this as a side hustle,
Yeah.
but you just had your second kid. You're on maternity leave and doing a side hustle. Have you projected forward? At some point, maternity leave ends, and you got to go back to work. Uh, I guess you don't have to go back to work. It depends on how well this takes off. But how are you going to manage balancing these two things, work and a side hustle, if it comes to pass that you're having to do both?
Yeah, yeah. So pre babies, like I definitely was a workaholic. I worked all the time. I don't know if I should be proud of that, but I mean, I would work, weekdays, and then I would like go home and like work at night and on the weekends. So it's definitely like having kids has kind of made me like set a bit more boundaries of like, okay, I can't work like 24 hours a day. Um, but like one thing that's nice about this business is that the kind of peak hours are like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is like not when I would be working my normal job. And then the other thing about this venture is one of the things that I'm planning on doing is like I didn't want to just make another job for myself. So I plan on having like employees eventually that, could be in the space when I'm not there.
Right, right. So, I mean, that's an interesting kind of point there of having employees. How are you thinking about setting the boundaries? Because honestly, the place that you're starting is kind of made for you because you've got young kids, and that could be a place you hang out. But if you go
Yeah.
hang out there, you're going to end up working. So, how are you thinking about setting boundaries for yourself between work and life and the other work?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that I heard when I was kind of researching this concept in particular is that a lot of owners or founders kind of go in thinking that, oh, this is a great venture because you can just like bring your kids to work. And I went in thinking I'm like, I know that's not possible. so so I mean, like I still like my kids have like right now they're in daycare, but one of them will start school pretty soon. So I still like I don't anticipate them kind of like coming with me. Like there's definitely a boundary of like when I'm working, and when I'm with them, it's kind of like our time to just be together. So that's definitely like a boundary. Although I do think there is something nice about a business like this where they can come and they can be there and they're not disruptive. They're not it's okay for them to just like be in the background doing something, or they can help out a little bit. Like, maybe they clean, and that's
Right. I'm projecting forward, Dominique, that, like 20 years from now, your kids are going to be like, yeah, mom, you had this great play space, but we never get to play in it. And you only made us work every time we went there.
yeah,
Like it
exactly.
wasn't fun for us. So I'm not sure how that conversation is going to go, but you should start preparing for it now because I have a feeling it's going to come at some point
Yeah,
for you.
no, I totally agree. I mean, one of the other things, like, I mean, that was something that, I had this conversation with like friends and, my husband who's like partnering with me in the business of just like, do we really want to focus so specifically on like this young group? So like the target age range is like 0 to 5, which is pretty specific. And I felt like the answer was yes, because there really is nothing catered to this group of new parents, or even like one of the things that we cater to for parties is like you could have a baby shower, but really focused on this group of age ranges of like it's really young but also like new parents, which doesn't seem to exist because a lot of the spaces focus on a little bit older, um, because you get a bit more kind of like longevity, of just like the kids can maybe use the space for longer, or
Right.
um,
Yeah. That thought about baby showers is interesting because I think the only baby showers I've ever seen or experienced has been in somebody's house
yeah,
or a large event space, which is not really built for this. And this might be, I'm sure there's probably baby shower venues out there that I don't know about, but I don't really, the fact that I don't know about them probably means that there's an opportunity in the marketplace there. So that you've probably found. So that's interesting. Um, okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about talk about something that you're probably not getting much of, which is sleep and thinking about wellness, especially having two young kids and now having a side hustle. How are you thinking about that? How are you taking care of yourself in all of this?
yeah. It's definitely a challenge. Sleep wise, I think the old cliche about like sleep when baby sleeps is true. But just trying to like take naps like whenever I can. And then, for the past like couple years now, I haven't like slept through the night, but but it hasn't been too terrible. And I think, everything is kind of a phase. So I'm just kind of like letting myself go through this phase of like, okay, like the next couple years will be a bit challenging because, my sleep schedule will be a bit chaotic, but we also go to bed really early. I think that's something that's different. Like I
Okay.
mentioned before I had kids, my husband works in tech as well. And we kind of were both very like typical tech, employees where like, we might work during the day and then come home and break and then like go back online and like work on either a side project or something at work for like, from like midnight to like 3 a.m. and like you just go all night.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's one of the hardest things to shift away from for me. It's like, oh, like it's really difficult. Even in my own, I'm like, it's my business. And theoretically I could work all day, all night on it.
Right.
But, but, for the sake of like my own sanity, as well as, the relationship with my kids, as well as my health, I'm like, okay, I have to stop and like really relegate myself to just work, one, when I have childcare, and two, like during hours when I shouldn't be sleeping. So that's
Right.
been that's a shift.
That's probably a good shift, I'd imagine, right there. I can't say that it's been a long time since I've worked until 3 in the morning. Those days are I don't know if I ever had those days. I crash at some point. It's like I need my sleep. But let me ask you about the fact that you're doing a physical space is different for you, especially because you've worked in tech and digital and all this stuff. How did you kind of get over that hump for yourself? Were you nervous at all about doing this? And then the second part of that is like, how did you think about pricing these things and figuring out like what price points people are willing to pay for this stuff?
Yeah. It was definitely, I would say it was a really big like mental hurdle to get over, in terms of going from like a software product or
Right.
idea to thinking about founding a physical space. I did a lot of research. I mentioned that, and it's really hard. Like, one of the things that I enjoyed about opening up a brick and mortar space was just I had felt like I had so much to learn. And that's always been important to me in whatever I'm doing is I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. And I also felt like having recently worked on some like AI products and just digital products, I was like, that's great. But like, I feel like what's missing. I just really want a physical place to go to. And everyone that I talked to was like, I also would enjoy a place to go to where there's a sense of community. And so I felt like there was a gap in the market that I didn't quite feel like software could fix. I talked to a mom who had been using the Peanut app, and she was like, yeah, there's this app, and like in theory, it should be, this place where you could go and meet other moms. She's like, but it's just not the same as like going to a place and like just having some serendipitous meeting with someone.
Right.
and
Yeah.
I just really like, I felt really like aligned with what she was saying. I was like, I totally agree. Like, there's just something nice about going to a space and having that be a place where you can go and your kids can run around. And I'm trying to limit my kids' screen time as well. So.
Yeah. I had no idea that there were, my kids are older, so I've not experienced any of this, and they were pre all of these apps. I didn't know there was an app for meeting other parents, that you could discuss things online. But yeah, that does seem like weird a little bit because it's just the parents talking, right? The kids aren't involved then at that point.
Yeah, I mean, there's apps and like digital offerings, but yeah, like, how do you get your kids to kind of have a play date or like run around
Right.
while you're doing this thing?
Right. Exactly. That's what like the jumping places and all that type of stuff is for. But I mean, you can't go to the jumping place every single day. So that it's interesting that this niche that you found here. Okay, so you've been doing this now for a few months now at this point,
Hmm.
although you've been thinking about it for a while. Is there anything already that you've realized like, oh, I should have done this differently? Like I've already learned some stuff and I've discovered like, oh, I did this wrong and I should have done it this way instead.
Um, I think one thing that I have learned i- doing this venture as well as like other ventures is just to like find product market fit as cheaply as possible before like investing, anything. And I think it's really difficult with any sort of like brick and mortar business. But so one of the things that I did was like I launched a website before I had anything, and and got feedback, but also like made it available for people to kind of like sign up for like pre memberships, or like, and I had some people, I had to turn it off because I was actually getting too many people buying, and I was worried that I was going to have to refund them, or like get into a situation where like, okay, people were like asking, like, are you open yet? Like, so I thought that was a really good sign, in terms of, both the location that I had found, and the unique offering of like how we were kind of like marketing this particular venture.
So you'd already found the space when you kind of opened online. How is it that you found the space as well?
Yeah, that was something that was interesting as someone who's never kind of like opened a brick and mortar space before.
Yeah.
I spent a number of months kind of like looking around at real estate and trying to figure out where a location might work. I had a number of locations where I was interested, but they weren't interested in me because they didn't want to take a chance on a startup. And so a number of places that I was like, this place is perfect. But, this would be a perfect place. They were like, we only want franchises. And this obviously is not that. So, or like I found one place that would have been like a nice place. but they wanted someone a bit more established, with like, just had been operating before in another location. So that was also interesting. Like I wasn't something that I necessarily would have thought, would be a barrier, was just like actually finding the space to lease.
Yeah.
But
I hope you kept a list of all of those organizations that said no to you. And at some point in the future, you do like a Julia Roberts Pretty Woman thing to them
yeah.
and be like, remember when? Yeah, no, you don't get my stuff anymore. When it's a big deal and they're asking you to come in instead of the other way around. Did you keep a list? You got that list, right? Okay, good.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not saying that you should be vindictive, but maybe you should be a little bit vindictive for the people that are not helping you like that. Just kidding. Okay, so last question for you. Well, maybe depends on what you say, and if I come up with another question here for you. But so you've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and you've now finally taken the leap into this. If you were talking to somebody else that was thinking about taking the leap like you did and starting a side hustle, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think, the advice that I would give them is, if you're passionate about something and you know that you can make it work, it's just to try and try something, right? Like you can jump in and maybe dip a toe. Like what can you do to, find your product market fit and find your, community of potential customers, maybe without taking as big a risk as, as little a risk as you possibly can. Like maybe you do pop-ups, or maybe you start something digital, like invest as cheaply as you possibly can to kind of figure out first what works. And also try out the space and see if you like it, because you can always kind of pivot before you like invest too much in it.
Yeah. Do you think for you, this kind of endeavor has been so far successful because you were able to draw on your skills as a designer into the space? Like, how much do you think that played actually into the so far kind of progress that you've made?
Yeah. Okay. I would say a lot, because one of the driving forces behind the business as well, of just like not having enough of things like this, was also this realization that the competition in the market was very poorly designed. And I say that, in terms of a multitude of things, like the actual physical space not being designed very well, the branding, the colors, the materials, just the whole experience being just kind of like meh. And so really feeling like, my husband and I would take our son to these, wherever we could, because we're like, well, it's the only game in town. But, really thinking like, well, what if there was something different? And what if there was something that was really beautifully designed, and really thoughtfully designed, and really kind of adhered to a more premium experience? Thinking like, would people pay for that? And then I just started kind of testing it. And I started like I put out a survey. It was like, would you pay for this? And, people saying yes. Or like I did one survey where I asked people, and to be fair, like my network's a bit, like most of my networks is here in Seattle and in the Bay Area, so used to a kind of higher price point. But they were thinking even higher than what I had even imagined. So I was like, okay, this could work.
Yeah. Yeah. That is fantastic. Dominique, this has been great. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
Yeah. So personally, I'm on LinkedIn, and then you can kind of find me on my business website, which is just www.nixi.city. And then the business is also on Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast, powered by Hiscox. To learn more about how Hiscox can help protect your small business through intelligent insurance solutions, visit hiscox.com. And to hear more Side Hustle to Small Business stories or share your own story, visit hiscox.com/side hustle to small business. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. You can find more about me at my website, sanjayparekh.com.